Today I want to share with you how to make the best sliceable corned beef. You will never have another stringy corned beef again. Plus, I've got a few surprises in store for you where I'm going to share with you some of my favorite St. Patrick's Day recipes. Hi, sweet friends. If we're meeting for the first time, I'm Mary from marysnest.com, and author of the Modern Pioneer Cookbook and the Modern Pioneer Pantry, and I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen. So I want to show you how to make a wonderful corned beef and cabbage dinner, and we're going to do it two ways. We're going to do one on the stovetop and one in the Instant Pot, and then I'm going to show you how to perfectly slice each of them so no stringy corned beef in sight. And if at any time you want to jump ahead, be sure to check the timestamps in the description below. Now, when we head over to my kitchen island in the first video, I'm going to show you how to make that wonderful corned beef and cabbage dinner on the stovetop. Then, in the second video, I'm going to show you how to make that same corned beef and cabbage dinner, but in the Instant Pot. Then once we make those wonderful corned beef and cabbage dinners and slice them beautifully, we're going to come back here to the kitchen table, and I have some more videos that I want to share with you in an amazing St. Patrick's Day marathon that I know you're going to love, because we're going to talk about a variety of Irish soda breads. We're going to talk about my Italian mother's very special Irish apple cake, which has a wonderful story associated with it. And then I have a surprise recipe for you that's actually a traditional Irish recipe, not an Irish-American recipe. It's a traditional Irish recipe that's very easy to make, and it can be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. But right now, let's go into the kitchen and let's start making that corned beef and cabbage dinner. Today I'm sharing a traditional corned beef and cabbage recipe. It's very easy to make and perfect for beginners. With St. Patrick's Day just around the corner, I thought I would share with you a traditional corned beef and cabbage recipe. Now, when I say traditional, does that mean this came from Ireland? Well, the answer is no. The truth is, the traditional dish in Ireland is bacon and cabbage. But when Irish immigrants came to America, they couldn't find bacon similar to the bacon they were used to at home. So instead, what they did was substitute with a brisket. And they often bought them at kosher delis. And so was born this wonderful Irish-American dish that we know as corned beef and cabbage, and often eaten on St. Patrick's Day. The beauty of this dish is it's just a one-pot meal, and you can make it at any time of year to enjoy, but it's perfect for St. Patrick's Day. And what you want to do is find a nice corned beef brisket. And I recommend a flat cut, because this is going to cook up beautifully and it's going to slice nicely. And I'll show you once it's cooked, because I don't know if you can see this on camera, but it has a grain going through it like this. But when you slice it against the grain, it's going to make beautiful slices that they're sort of showing here on the package. So you want to look for a flat cut. And this is about 4 pounds. And so I'm thinking that this will feed maybe about 8 people, 6 to 8. It does shrink a bit once you cook it, so plan for that. And in the package with the brisket comes a seasoning packet, and it's got some mustard seeds and various things like that, which you'll want to add into the pot when you cook this brisket. So this is what you want to look for: a nice corned beef brisket, classic flat cut. And the next things that you're going to want is 2 pounds of carrots, 2 nice heads of cabbage, 4 onions, and about 2 pounds of potatoes. Now, when it comes to potatoes, I like to use these little ones, and I keep the skins on and throw them right in. I think they work beautifully when making corned beef and cabbage. But you can certainly use any kind of potato you want, and if it's a large potato, I recommend leaving the skins on. I think it adds a nice flavor, and it just sort of fits in nicely with the rustic look of the dish. But what I would recommend is that you just cut them up. And even though the brisket does come with a spice packet, I like to add in some black peppercorns and 2 bay leaves as well. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is take this brisket out of the package. I'm going to put it in a large pot. You want to make sure that you have a nice large pot, because we're going to add the vegetables in later too. And you're going to put it in there. We're going to cover it with water. We're going to bring it to a boil. Some foam will probably come to the top. We're going to skim that off, and then we're going to add in the seasoning packet, or the spice packet as it's called. Because if we put the spice packet in with the meat as we're bringing it up to a boil, it may float to the top, and we don't want to remove all the nice spices when we remove the foam. So I've got my pot filled up about halfway with water. I've got the flat brisket down on the bottom there. And I'm going to bring this up to a boil. I'll remove the foam, and at that point I'll add in the seasoning packet, and then I'll also add in the onions. Now, this is going to need to cook for 4 hours to be nice and tender, because it's 4 pounds, or approximately 4 pounds. And if it's 3 pounds, it'd be 3 hours. And usually you don't want to get a brisket any smaller than 3 pounds, or a corned beef brisket any smaller than 3 pounds, because they do shrink. So you want to make sure you have enough for your dinner as well as leftovers, because leftovers are delicious for not only making sandwiches with, or even a delicious hash. So this will cook for a total of 2 hours, but at about 3 hours, we'll put in our carrots, our cabbage, and our potatoes and let them cook along with the brisket. But you don't want to put them in now, because they'll get overcooked and the potatoes will probably disintegrate. I know when I was first learning to cook, I put everything in the beginning, and when I served it up, my mom was like, my mom taught me how to cook, and my mom was like, what happened to the potatoes? And then I realized they had all disintegrated. So I'll put them in about the last hour. Now I brought this up to a boil, and as the foam rose to the top, I just wanted to show you, I just scooped this off. And this is what, when you scoop through the foam and pull it through a slotted spoon, this is what you're going to see. It's just little minor impurities, nothing serious, but it's best to remove it. So I've got this down to a simmer, and now I'm going to add in the spice packet. And basically it's just some herbs and some mustard seeds. Now I'm going to peel these onions and I'm going to quarter them. But I'm going to show you what I do. When I quarter them, I'm going to leave the root in so that they stay together as they're cooking with the corned beef. So I cut my onion in half and I remove the blossom end, and then I'm just going to peel off 1 layer or so just to get rid of the skin and a little bit of the onion. I don't mind that because I like to save this for making bone broth. Alrighty, so now I've got the stem in, and I'm just gonna cut it right down like that. I'm gonna leave that stem on because that'll help keep the onion together, and then it'll be flavoring the meat, but it'll also be nice to be able to serve with each individual serving on the plate, rather than just having little bits of onion that, you know, may have disintegrated. This will stay more intact. Well, I've got my last onion all done. I've got the root in. I've just cut a little bit off of the blossom. I've got all my scraps here, which I'm going to save for bone broth, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in with the corned beef. And now I'm going to let this simmer for about 3 hours. I'm going to put the lid on, and I've just got it simmering. It's at about medium. And if you notice it boiling, you're going to want to lower it. But on this little stovetop, it's going to be about medium will be good. And I'm going to let that cook for 3 hours, and then we're going to go in and add the cabbage, the carrots, and the potatoes, and I'll show you how we prepare all of those to add in with the corned beef. Oh, and I almost forgot my peppercorns and my bay leaves. I've got those in too. Alrighty, so we'll let that simmer for 3 hours. And while that's simmering, one thing I have to share with you is that for all the years I've been cooking, I've never found the secret to cutting onions without having my eyes tear up. I don't know if you could tell. And so if you know the secret, let me know in the comments below, because I would love to learn. Well, while that's simmering, I want to show you how I prep the vegetables. Now with the carrots, all I do is peel them. Certainly you're free to leave them unpeeled, but I just feel it makes a little nicer presentation when you bring the platter of food to the table, the bright orange of the peeled carrot. Now I'm going to save all these shreds, because these shreds can go into your bone broth when you make that. So this is saving vegetable scraps is a terrific way to use them up rather than throwing them out. Or if you want, certainly you can put them in the compost pile, but they're great for adding to broth, to bone broth when you make it, or any kind of or broth or stock. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut off the tail and cut off the blossom end over there. And then basically what I'll do is I like them to be served in a healthy portion. You can slice them any way you want, but since I am going to put them in about an hour before, I just like to cut them basically into about this size. And I find that's perfect. When it comes to the cabbage, what I do is something very similar to what I did with the onions. I'm just going to quarter this, and I'm going to leave the stem in, because this way it'll stay together and it'll make it for an easy serving when you go to remove it from the platter to each person's serving plate. You'll be able to put an entire quarter of cabbage rather than the leaves just sort of going every which way. So all I'm going to do then is just quarter this cabbage right down the middle. So I've got the 2 halves now with the stem in, and now I'm going to cut each half into half again so that I have a quarter. The cabbage is quartered. Well, I've got the cabbage all quartered, and I'm going to do the same thing to my other cabbage. And then when it's time for it to go into the pot, it'll just go in right like this, and it'll cook like this. And then when it comes time to serve, you can serve it like this. It's perfect. Now I switched to my cooktop, so I brought you over here because I was worried about having this heavy pot on the little portable cooktop. Now this has been simmering for about 3 hours, and it's looking and smelling delicious. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and add in the potatoes. And now I'm going to go ahead and add in the carrots, and on the very top I'm going to put the cabbage. Well, I've got everything in my pot, and I've got the cabbage right there on top, and I'm going to put the lid on and let that simmer for another hour. Well, this has now been simmering for 4 hours, and it looks wonderful. The vegetables are beautifully cooked, and all we need to do now is just remove this top layer of fat, and once we get that off, we'll slice it up. Alrighty, well, I removed that fat layer, and now I flipped it over, and I want to see if you can see this on the camera, but the grain on the meat is going in this direction. So in order to slice this so that it stays together, we want to slice it against the grain. So if the grain is going this way, then we want to slice it this way. But don't worry if you don't want to slice it, or if it does fall apart. It's delicious, and you can even just take a fork and pull it apart. Oh, and this just looks lovely, and it's slicing up beautifully, and it's so nice and lean. These flat cuts are really terrific. You leave that fat layer on when you're cooking it for the flavor, but then you remove it as I did before you slice it. And look at these wonderful slices. And look at this wonderful corned beef and cabbage meal. Today I want to share with you how to make Instant Pot corned beef and cabbage. This is an easy Instant Pot recipe, and you can have this corned beef ready in half the time it would take to cook it on the stovetop. Now, in a previous video, I showed you how to make corned beef and cabbage on the stovetop. And in this video, I thought I'd show you how to do it in the Instant Pot. On the stovetop, it can take 4 hours or more, but in the Instant Pot, in total, it can take about 2 hours. Now we're just going to cook the corned beef for 90 minutes, but it does take time for the Instant Pot to come up to pressure, and then we're going to cook our vegetables. That takes about another 5 minutes. But literally in about 2 hours, you can have a wonderful corned beef and cabbage dinner ready to serve. Now what you're going to want to do is look for something called a corned beef brisket at your grocery store. And what I've got here is a 5-pound corned beef brisket, and it's a flat cut, or sometimes referred to as a classic flat cut. And the reason that I like a flat cut is because it slices up very nicely so that you can get some lovely slices of corned beef to serve with your cabbage and your other vegetables. That makes for a very appetizing meal. Now, in terms of servings, I kind of have to laugh a little at this because on mine it says a serving size is 4 ounces. And this being a 5-pound brisket would mean that there would be a lot of servings in this. But in my personal opinion, I think maybe 4 to 6 people this would feed. This is going to shrink when you cook it. So depending on how hearty your appetites are, this may just serve about 4 people. So that's something to keep in mind when you shop and you look for your brisket and how many pounds it is. Now I want to flip this over while it's raw, and there's something I want to talk to you about in terms of the grain of the meat. And I'm going to overlay a video so you can see and follow along as exactly what I'm talking about. If you look at this while it's raw, and you will be able to see this also when it's cooked, but I want to show you this while it's raw because it's a lot easier to see on camera with the differentiation between the meat and the fat while it's white, with the meat being red. You're going to see the grain of the meat going in a certain direction. Now, when this is cooked, you want to slice it what's called against the grain. And what that means is you want to take your knife and slice your corned beef or your corned beef brisket against the grain. So here are the lines that are going in one direction, the grain, and then you want to take your knife and you want to slice this corned beef in the other direction. And that's what is going to allow you to have these lovely slices. If you don't slice it against the grain, if you slice it with the grain, it's going to fall apart and it's going to be very stringy. Now, some people like to do that. They like to just take a fork and just shred it. The only problem I've found with that is that if you just go with the grain and shred it, it can be a little chewy. And I personally think it looks a little less appetizing when you bring it to the table. So that's something to keep in mind, that just pay attention to the direction in which your grain is going. And then when you go to slice it in the opposite direction of which the grain is going. And you're gonna get some lovely, beautiful corned beef slices. Alrighty, well, we'll get ready to take this out of the package. And there's just a little story that I want to share with you. You may be wondering, if you're new to cooking, how corned beef got its name. Why is it called corned beef? It's basically a beef brisket that's been pickled. So where does corned come in? Well, it's pickled with grains of salt that are about the size of maybe your pinky nail or a piece of corn. And so was born the name corned beef. And the other thing I'd like to share with you is, which I shared in the other video where I make the corned beef and cabbage on the stovetop, is this really an Irish dish, or is it more an Irish-American dish? And actually, this is an Irish-American dish. This was somewhat invented, you could say, by Irish immigrants who settled here in the United States. A more common dish in Ireland is bacon and cabbage. But here we've got brisket, basically, that's been corned beef, and cabbage. And it was because the Irish immigrants couldn't find bacon that was similar to the bacon they were used to back home. But what they found was brisket at Jewish delis. And so they would buy the brisket and they would pickle it, or maybe it already would be pickled for them. And then they would cook this with cabbage, and so was born corned beef and cabbage, the quintessential Irish-American dish that is commonly served here in the United States on St. Patrick's Day. Now, when you remove your corned beef brisket from its packaging, inside with the meat is also going to be another little package of seasoning. And it's primarily mustard seeds. It's got a little bit of crumbled bay leaves, and in this one there looks like there might be some little red pepper flakes. And this you're going to add right in with your meat when we go ahead and cook it. Now, in addition to this, I also like to add a little bit of a handful of black peppercorns and a couple more bay leaves. Now, when it comes to putting your corned beef into your Instant Pot, you have a couple of options. You can use your rack, or you can go ahead and put this right into the Instant Pot. I like to use the rack, and the reason is, once you cook corned beef, it's very tender and it can easily fall apart. And certainly, with 2 forks or a spatula or whatever, you can get it out. But I find being able to lift it out on the rack makes it a little easier. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on the rack, and then we'll get ready to put it in the Instant Pot. Now, before I put this on the rack, I actually want to show you when I turn the corned beef over, there's a very thick layer of fat here. And you don't want to remove that at this point. You want to let the corned beef cook with this layer of fat on it, because it's going to add flavor to your final product. Now, when we remove the corned beef from the Instant Pot, This will be very, very gelatinous in a way, and we can easily pull it off. It'll come off very easily. We'll basically just scrape it off and set it aside, and then we'll get ready to slice our brisket. And also, just flipping it back up on this side, I want to show you, I took a picture and I'll overlay it without the packaging so that you can again see the grain of this meat and the direction that it's going in. And when we get ready to slice it, as I had shared, we're going to slice it against that. That's what that means, against the grain. So the grain is going this way, and we're going to wind up slicing it that way. But for now, let's get it on the rack. Now, I like to put my corned beef on the rack with the fat side up. So as it cooks and the fat begins to melt, it seeps down into the meat, adding flavor and tenderness. Now we'll just go ahead and lower this down into our Instant Pot. Once you get this lowered down into your Instant Pot, and don't worry if it's a little tight, just fit it in the best that you can, depending on what size and poundage you have. And then what you're going to do is open your seasoning packet, and you're just going to sprinkle it all across the top of the corned beef. Then we'll go ahead and add in our bay leaves and the rest of our peppercorns. Now the next thing that we're going to do is add our water, and all we need is enough water to just cover the meat. And when you do that, you do want to make sure though that you don't go past the 2/3 mark, which is marked here on the liner of your Instant Pot. It'll say PC Max 2/3, and that indicates the pressure cooker maximum amount of fluid that you can put into your pressure cooker or into your Instant Pot that we're using as a pressure cooker. So that's just what you want to make sure of. Now don't worry if for some reason you have a very large piece of corned beef brisket, or maybe you've even put 2 in, which you can also do, and you find that when you go to add your water, it would go higher than that 2/3 mark. Don't worry about it. Don't fill it past that 2/3 mark. It's okay if some of the meat isn't completely covered. So now we'll go ahead and pour in our water until we just cover this meat. And as I said, if a little bit is sticking out, the little bit of that fat layer is sticking out, don't worry about it at all. And I'll overlay a picture so you can see what everything looks like with the meat and the spices and the water added. But now what we're going to do is we're going to get ready to cook our corned beef. And we're going to pressure cook this for 90 minutes. Then, just to give you a little bit of a preview, we'll remove it, we'll let it rest, which is good for it to rest before we slice it. And then we'll add in our veggies, and they're going to take about another 5 minutes. But what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and put our lid on. Now I just want to mention, before I put the lid on, if you're new to working with the Instant Pot, there's a little valve here, and one is in the open position, the venting, and the other is in the sealing position. And if you're new to working with this, there's really no fanfare. I was expecting a big click. I've shared this with you in other Instant Pot videos, but basically it just lowers or raises, and that's it. And for this preparation, as we're using the pressure cooking option, we're going to want to make sure that we have it in the sealed or sealing position. And then you'll also notice you may have a red button or a silver button there. When it comes up to pressure, that button will raise up, and when it comes down from pressure, that little button will go down. But we'll talk about that after we get this all cooked. So right now we're just going to go ahead and put our lid on, and you hear a little song when you put it on, and then when you lock it into position, you'll hear another little song. Then, as I said, you just take, and I'll overlay a picture, a close-up picture of that vent. So you want to, if it's on venting, you just want to lower it and put it to sealing. Now, as I said, we're going to cook this for 90 minutes, and it is going to be on the pressure cook option, and it's going to be on the high selection. Now, I'll take a close-up picture of this panel so that you can see what I'm talking about. Your button for pressure cook may simply say pressure cook, as mine does. It may say manual cook. Either button is fine to press. A third option is if you have a meat stew button, you can also press that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the pressure cook, and that's set for 15 minutes, so I've got to increase that up to 90 minutes. Okay, 1 hour and 30 minutes is 90 minutes, and it is already set on high. If it wasn't, if your pressure cooker was set on low, there it goes, it turns on automatically. You would just use the pressure level button to adjust low or high. So we're all set. We'll just wait 1 hour and 30 minutes or 90 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now I'm using an 8-quart Instant Pot. You can also do this in a 6-quart Instant Pot. The only thing that you need to be aware of is if you're using the 8-quart Instant Pot and you go to add your water to cover your meat, you want to make sure that you have at least 2 cups of water, which you're going to most likely to be able to cover your meat. But when you use your 8-quart Instant Pot in its pressure cooker mode, you want to make sure that you have at least 2 cups of liquid in there to prevent any burning. On the other hand, if you're using your 6-quart Instant Pot, again, you're going to add enough water to cover, and you want to make sure that you have at least 1.5 cups of water in your Instant Pot, using the pressure cooker option to prevent any burning. But in making corned beef, whether you're using the 8-quart or you're using the 6-quart, you're going to have at least that much water. So hopefully it's not a concern. Well, the 90 minutes is up, this is cooked, and now my Instant Pot has just clicked over to stay warm, and we're going to do a quick release on this. And this is one part of working with the Instant Pot that I don't like. So I always use a long wooden spoon to do this, but it's on sealing as I showed you earlier, and the little red button is up. I'll overlay a picture so you can see exactly what that looks like, and that means it's under pressure. And so what we're going to do is when we push this from sealing to venting, you're going to see the steam come out. Here we go. Well, now using the quick release, all the steam has come out and the little red button has gone down, which means that the Instant Pot is no longer under pressure and it's safe to open. So that's what we'll go ahead and do. You hear a little music. And then what I like to do is when I open it, because steam can come out of it, I always like to open it away from me. Yeah, see, all that steam came out. This looks glorious. Now I'm just going to lift this out. And I'm just using some paper towels to hold on to the rack because the rack is a little hot, but I also find it difficult to get in there with pot holders. But if you've got those little silicone mitts, that'll probably work very well. Now I'm just going to tent this with a little bit of aluminum foil and put this aside, and we'll get ready to add our veggies in. Now for the veggies, what I have here are 2 pounds of carrots and 2 pounds of the baby red skin potatoes. Now you can use any kind of potato you want, but I recommend the ones with the thin skin. I think they do a little better. And if they're large potatoes, you'll just want to quarter them. And then I've got 2 heads of green cabbage. They each weigh about 3 pounds each, but this is not an exact science, so don't worry about it. And I also want to let you know that I'll have a link to the recipe in the description below, and that's a direct link that'll take you right to the recipe over on my website, same name, Mary's Nest, as the YouTube channel. And you can read that online or you can print it out, so don't worry, you don't have to write anything down. Now I've peeled my carrots. You can leave them unpeeled, that's really up to you. And I'm just going to cut them in about thirds so that maybe each piece is about 3 inches long. But again, none of this is an exact science, so do what you're comfortable with. And if you make bone broth, and you've been with me for a while, you know I make a lot of bone broth. Be sure to save all your scraps, your peelings and the tips and the tails of the carrots that you cut off. That's wonderful for using, adding into your bone broth. And if I have any carrots that are quite a bit thicker than most of the other ones that I have, I'm just going to split those, and that'll help with the cooking process. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start dropping these carrots in, and be careful because the water is very hot, so if it splashes back onto your hand, it may burn you a little. So just be very careful as you place these down in. You could even use a little bit of a strainer or something like that to drop them all in. Next, we'll go ahead and drop in our potatoes. Next, we'll get ready to prepare the cabbage, and what I like to do is leave the core in and cut it into 4s and then place it right on top. And I find by leaving the core in, this helps keep the cabbage together. So when you go to serve it, you can put a quarter of a head of cabbage on each person's plate. So when you cut it down like that, you'll see the core is right here. We'll just give it some feet, so to speak, so that it's steady. And we're just going to cut it. I'll turn this around so that you can see. We're just going to cut it right down the middle so that we still have that stem intact. Perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead and get ready to put in all of my cabbage. Now, when I do this, that is going to raise the water line over the 2/3 mark. So I'm going to want to use a measuring cup or any, heat-proof safe cup you have to remove some of that liquid. Now, you might say, gee, couldn't I just put in less liquid when I originally cooked my corned beef? And that's a great question. I find that if the majority of the meat is not submerged in liquid during the pressure cooking process, it just doesn't come as tender as it would if you cooked it on the stovetop. So I recommend go ahead and add in as much water as you can to make sure that the meat is mostly covered. And then when it comes time to do the vegetables, we can just remove some of that liquid and then you can save it. It can be very great for, cooking beans in and different things like that. So I'll just go ahead and start putting this cabbage down into here, and then we'll get ready to see how much liquid we need to take out. Well, I only needed to take out a tiny little bit of liquid, and I've just got the one head of cabbage in there, and it's quite full, so I'll do these on the second round. Now we'll get ready to put our lid back on. We're going to hear our music. And then we're going to lock that into place. Hear the music again. We're going to make sure that our vent is on sealing. And then we're going to cancel because this is in the keep warm stage. So we're just going to hit cancel. That's going to turn it off. Then we're going to hit pressure cook. And then we're going to adjust the time down to 5 minutes. Alrighty, now we've got that at 5 minutes and it's still set on high, which is what we want. And then that's going to automatically click on, there it goes, and it'll start cooking those veggies. Now while those veggies are cooking, I just want to talk about the onions, because you've seen them on my island. You might be wondering, is she going to use the onions or not? And actually, if you want to use onions, you can. If you put them in with the meat, they can add some flavoring, but I don't find it to be significant because of the pickling process of the corned beef, which has a lot of flavor already. And basically after 90 minutes in the Instant Pot, they're pretty well, almost close to being disintegrated. But today, my Instant Pot was so full with the carrots and the potatoes and the cabbage, I didn't want to go and try to push in some onions as well, because it was quite full with veggies. So what I might do is add some in if I want with my second round when I cook the rest of the cabbage for another 5 minutes. But it's really personal preference, and we have so much cabbage and carrots and potatoes with this. I almost feel it's not really necessary. Now while those veggies are cooking, we'll remove this corned beef off of its rack, and I'll show you how we'll start to skim off this fat on top. Now the fat cap, so to speak, on top of the corned beef is very gelatinous, very jelly-like. And you can use your knife, you can use a wooden spoon, a spatula, whatever you have, and it'll be very easy to remove it. See, I'm just going right with this spoon, and I'm just going to transfer it to this plate. And if you find that any of it's like a little firm and wanting to hold on, you can just come in with your knife, and you can just start removing it like that. Very easy to do. You're going to find that it's very soft. Now that we've got all the fat off, what I'm noticing is that this particular piece of corned beef almost has 2 levels, so to speak, to it. So I'm going to separate them and also get out that little bit of fat that's between these 2 layers, and then we'll slice it up. So I'm just going to go in here with my knife and just separate these 2 layers. Perfect. And now you'll see that'll reveal some fat in here, which we'll get ready to remove. See that nice layer of fat. We'll take that right out. Alrighty, now that we've got them separated, we've got a lot of the fat removed, I've turned them over on the side that's easiest for me to see the grain, and I'll overlay a video so that you can see, but the grain in this piece is going this way. So if the grain is going this way, then we want to slice it this way to get those nice slices. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. We'll take this piece. This will look a little bit of a chunky piece, but I'll show you how nice it is when you slice against the grain. And I'll take some close-up pictures so you can see exactly how lovely this looks. Well, I've got that all sliced up, and now this piece, this little top piece, or bottom piece, whatever we ought to call it, that I removed, has the grain running straight up and down like that. So we want to cut it this way, and I already cut one slice to show you, but see, it comes so nice. And I'll take some more up-close pictures as I cut the rest of these. So you just want to look for whatever the grain in the particular piece of corned beef that you has, and then just cut it the opposite way. And it won't be stringy, it won't be tough when you go to eat it, it'll just be lovely and delicious. Now we'll go ahead and just slip this knife under here and do our best to transfer this to the platter. Okay, good job. Well, the veggies finished cooking while I was slicing the meat, and it clicked over to keep warm. So I'm going to hit cancel, which just basically turns off the Instant Pot. And then I'm going to take my trusty spoon and move this from sealing to venting to do a quick release. Whoop. There we go. Well, all the steam came out from the quick release, and the little red button is down, which means it's now safe for us to open the Instant Pot. So again, we just turn it, hear the music, and as I said, I always like to open it away from me because steam does tend to come out, and look at all that. Oh, well, everything looks beautifully cooked, and I'm just going to use this little strainer to start scooping things out and putting them onto the serving platter. Well, look at this glorious meal. This is just going to be fantastic to bring to the table. Now, I've put some over here. I got a little cook's treat of the meat and the potato, and I want to show you how beautifully everything is cooked. The cabbage is wonderfully soft, as it should be. You want the cabbage to be nice and soft, and you want your carrots definitely beautifully fork tender. Your potato also wonderfully fork tender. And now let's taste this piece de resistance, the corned beef and cabbage. I mean, the corned beef at least. Oh, delicious. So tender, it melts in your mouth. Well, this just came lovely. I hope you'll give corned beef and cabbage in the Instant Pot a try. Well, now that you've learned how to make a delicious corned beef and cabbage dinner and slice that corned beef beautifully, it's time to try your hand at making Irish soda bread. Irish soda bread is such a wonderful accompaniment to your corned beef and cabbage dinner. Plus, any extra that you have toasts beautifully the next day. Put butter and jam on it. It's just scrumptious. And I'm going to share with you 3 different recipes. One is so easy to make, and you probably have all the supplies you're going to need right in your pantry. And that's a very simple Irish soda bread made with all-purpose flour or bread flour. Whatever you have on hand will do the trick. Then we're going to make a more traditional Irish soda bread using a whole grain flour. And that's just delightful. It's, again, it's easy to make, and it has a much more hearty texture to it. And it's one that I really like. And in the third recipe, we're going to make an Irish soda bread that uses mostly whole grain flour, but a little all-purpose or bread flour to just help kind of lighten the load, so to speak, lift the bread a little bit. And we can add raisins to it or currants, any dried fruit that you'd like. But best of all, in that third recipe, I'm going to show you how to take whole grain. So if you have maybe wheat berries on hand or spelt berries, either will work very well. I'm going to show you how I grind them in my grain mill and use fresh milled flour to make the soda bread. So if you're just starting to try your hand at baking with freshly milled flour, I think you're going to really like that third video. And so if you want, again, like I mentioned earlier, I'll have the timestamps in the description below. You can jump ahead to that one if you'd like to see that. But I think that if you are new to baking, if you've maybe just started baking, the first Irish soda bread is very easy, as is the second one. And the third one, yes, you can certainly use your store-bought flours, but if you are starting to grind your whole grain and make your fresh milled flour, I think you're going to really like that third recipe. Well, let's get over to my kitchen island and get baking in those videos. Today I want to share with you how to bake bread without yeast. This is a very easy soda bread, and it's a perfect substitute for those round artisan loaves of bread when you don't have any yeast or sourdough starter. Well, I think this has really got to be one of the easiest breads in the world to make. It only requires 4 ingredients and can be ready and baked up in 30 minutes. Now, the rising agent in this bread is baking soda, hence where the bread gets its name, soda bread. So what you want to do is go and look in the back of your pantry somewhere. I'm confident you have one of those little orange boxes of baking soda, and get that out. Now, don't worry if it's expired. Baking soda often can still work past its expiration date. And I'll show you a little test to do to see if it's still active. All you're going to want to do is take a little baking soda, put it in a glass, and then get some vinegar. Can be any vinegar you have. This is just my homemade apple cider vinegar. And if that's something you want to learn how to make, I'll be sure to put a link in the iCards and in the description below. But any vinegar will work. And you're just going to pour the vinegar over the baking soda. Woo! Ah! Well, my baking soda is indeed very active, and that's exactly what you're looking for it to foam up like that. Now, don't worry if you don't have any baking soda. Another option that you can use is baking powder. It changes the texture of the bread slightly, but it's still very delicious. However, if you use baking powder, you're going to need a little more than you will with baking soda. And I'll put a link in the description underneath this video that'll take you over to my website where it'll have the printable recipe, and I'll explain what you need to do if you use baking powder versus baking soda and all of that. But the bottom line is we're going to go with 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and if you're using baking powder, you're going to probably want to use about a tablespoon. But if you are using baking soda, the secret is to not overdo. Baking soda has somewhat of a distinct flavor, and a teaspoon is really all you ever need to rise a quick bread like this. In this case, our quick bread is a soda bread. But if you tend to err on the side of wanting to put in more baking soda, try to rein yourself in because it can affect the flavor. And then the other ingredient you're going to need is a teaspoon of salt. And this is just a fine ground sea salt, but use whatever salt you have. And then the next ingredient that you're going to need is your liquid, and this is 1½ cups of buttermilk. But don't worry if you don't have buttermilk. There are a lot of ways to make substitutes for buttermilk, and I have a video which I'll link to in the iCards and in the description below where I go over all those various options. But quickly, what I'll tell you is that you can just put in your 1½ cups of milk and add in a little bit of vinegar or a little bit of lemon juice, and that'll cause the milk to curdle. It may take about an hour, and it'll get nice and thick, and it'll have the consistency of buttermilk. Some other options are thinning yogurt to the consistency of buttermilk, thinning sour cream to the consistency of buttermilk, and if way back in your pantry you have a little jar of cream of tartar, that can work too. You can add in a teaspoon or 2 into some milk, and that'll cause it to curdle and create somewhat of a soured milk, buttermilk substitute. Now let's talk about the star of the show, the flour. I've got 2 cups of all-purpose flour in here. Some of you may know it as plain flour. Now I'm just going to make this bread, this soda bread, today with all-purpose flour. But you can use a variety of flours to make this bread. Now we're going to discuss the different types of flour that you can use to make this bread, But the first thing we're going to do is add in another cup of flour, because this recipe calls for 3 cups of flour. And I just wanted to show you that all you need to do is scoop your flour right out of your bag and just level it off with your finger. Nothing fancy, no need to weigh anything or sift anything. So as I said, I've got all-purpose flour in here. You can also use bread flour or any whole grain flour. You can use whole wheat flour, you can use spelt flour, you can use einkorn, any type of flour that you want. Now, I have a recipe where I show you how to do this with part all-purpose flour and part whole grain flour. And I'll be sure to link to that in the iCards and in the description below. So if you're in that transition phase where you're transitioning from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, and you want to incorporate more whole grains into making this soda bread, you can refer to that recipe. And if you're real gung-ho and you're 100% traditional foods kitchen and you want to make this with all whole grain flour, you certainly can do that. However, I just want to let you know that if you've not done it before, your final product, your final Irish soda bread, will be a little denser, but also in a way more traditional, because there is some controversy as to whether there should be any all-purpose or plain flour in soda bread. So let's go ahead and just sprinkle our salt over this. And then when it comes to the baking soda, you can put this over a little sifter and just to get out any lumps that might be in the baking soda. Or you can just put it right into your hands and just give it a little rubbing like this. Then you just want to take a whisk or a wooden spoon, spatula, whatever you have, and just give your flour a real good stir around to make sure that the salt and the baking soda are well incorporated with the flour. Alrighty, well, once you get this all well incorporated, the next thing that we're going to do before we even add in our wet is to make sure that our oven is preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, there are a lot of things that you can do to jazz up soda bread. And one is adding some type of dried fruit. If you want to do that, to add little currants, for example, you would put them in at this point. You could add up to a cup of whatever you wanted, and you would just want to toss it around so that it was well coated by the flour. And that will make sure that your dried fruit stays well distributed throughout your soda bread and doesn't all sink to the bottom. Now, another thing that you can add at this stage, which you would actually add before you put in any dried fruit, would be butter. Now, this is totally optional, but if you want, you could put in about 2 tablespoons of butter, nice cold butter, and then just work it with your hands to the point where it was just sort of like sand-like, and maybe a few little pea-sized pieces of butter throughout your flour. However, that's completely optional, and today I wanted to show you how to just do a very basic soda bread. And speaking of additions, another thing that you can do at this point is add an egg to your buttermilk and just give it a little whisk to break up the egg and incorporate it with your buttermilk, and then add that to your dry ingredients. And that will make your soda bread richer as well. But again, that's completely optional, and we're just going to stick with the basic version today. So now what I'm going to do is just make a little bit of a well right in the middle of the dough, of the flour, where we can pour in our buttermilk, and then I'll show you how to mix this up. And one other thing I wanted to mention, if you want to add a little extra nutrition to this, you can also add in some oats, some old-fashioned rolled oats. And you would do that at the same time that you were adding in your dried fruit, about 2 tablespoons, but again, completely optional. Now, what you want to do is mix this with a very light, gentle hand, and there's no kneading involved because we want to keep this bread as light as possible. So you're just going to kind of go in with an open hand. You'll often hear Irish cooks say, make your hand like a little claw, and just go in and start to incorporate, go all around with your open hand, incorporating the flour into the liquid. I'll overlay a little video so you can see exactly what I'm doing, but just see, it's hard to see now with all this wet dough, but you're just keeping your hand very open and just mixing, coming up from the bottom to make sure that you incorporate all the flour, and just keep working this until you get all the flour moistened, but it really shouldn't take more than maybe 30 seconds to a minute. So that'll come together very quickly. It'll be kind of a wet, sticky dough. That's exactly what you're looking for. And if for any reason when you're blending it all together and you find that it's very, very dry, you can add maybe a tablespoon more of the buttermilk, but just be careful, don't overdo. Sometimes if it's very dry in your kitchen or dry outside, you may need a little more. And if it's very wet, you may actually need a little less. So if you find it's too wet, then you can always just sprinkle a little flour, but don't even really worry about it, because once you get it out down onto your board, we're going to be adding more flour. The more important thing is if you feel it's exceptionally dry, you can add in another tablespoon, but this was perfect. The 1.5 cups worked great. And it should lift out quite easily out of your bowl with most of the bowl looking clean. Now you just want to get a flat surface. I'm just using a cutting board here, and sprinkle it liberally with some flour. Just smooth that all around on your surface, and then we're going to go in here and we're going to pull out our dough. Now flour your hands nicely, and all we're going to do is just work this into a round shape. No kneading at all. And just work it. You can get some flour over there. And it's okay, it's going to look all craggy and broken up in places, little cracks and whatnot. That's perfect. You definitely, whatever you do, you don't want to knead this, you don't want to overwork it. Just get it into your nice round shape, and you're perfect. Now once you get it shaped nicely, it should only take a few turns and a few pats. As I said, we don't want to overwork it. You have a couple of options as to how to bake it. You can bake it right on just a baking sheet. Some folks call this a jelly roll pan. I like to put a little parchment paper down, and then we'll sprinkle it with a little flour. That'll work perfectly. You can also use a cast iron frying pan if you have one of these. And you can again just sprinkle a little flour in there and drop your bread right into that. Now, if you want to get fancy and something that creates quite a good rise on your soda bread is to copy the technique of the no-knead breads. And what you'll want to do is put a Dutch oven into your oven while it's preheating, and then take it out carefully, you know, as if you've done the no-kneads, take it out very carefully with pot holders. Remove the lid, and then you can put this onto some parchment paper and lower it down into the hot pot, put the lid back on, and put it in your oven. And you'll bake it for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, you'll remove the Dutch oven, again carefully, everything's very hot. Remove the lid, slip out the parchment paper, and put it back into the oven. Put the pot without the lid and no parchment paper, but the bread intact. Put it back into your oven and let it bake for another 5 minutes. That creates quite something. I'll do that another day, but today I want to keep it very basic and very simple, because I think most folks will have a baking sheet or a cast iron frying pan. And if you want, if all you have are cake pans, you can definitely bake this in a cake pan. And again, you can just sprinkle it with some flour, or if you want, cut a little round of parchment and then sprinkle that with flour and put your dough onto that. But there's something I want to share with you that I think is so clever. And I can't really remember where I read this or saw a video. I might have read it on a food blog or something. But someone baked, and if you've seen this and you know who it is, let me know in the comments below, so I'll link to their channel or blog post. But they put this dough into their cake pan, and then they took a second cake pan and put it on top, almost to make like a little baby Dutch oven, and baked their Irish soda bread like this. And it looked glorious when he or she, I can't remember, unveiled it. So that's something to experiment with. So today I'm going to use my baking sheet, and I've got the parchment paper, and I've just put a little flour down on that, and then we're just going to gently pick up our round here, just give it another little shape. And then actually, at this point, we're going to flatten our little perfect round. And we're just going to get it to about 1.5 inches, maybe. Just flatten it out, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And when I say that 1.5 inches, I mean in height. So you just give it a little pat to flatten it out. And then next, the most important thing you need to do is give your soda bread an Irish blessing. And you just want to take a sharp knife and just make a cross right across the top of the bread. Just like that. And then, after you've done the blessing, you can poke each of the 4 corners, just like this, to, as my Irish father would tell me, we'll let the fairies out. And if we let the fairies out, we're going to get a good rise on our bread. The next thing you want to do is brush the top of your buttermilk with a little bit of milk, or if you've still got your cup with the little bit of remaining buttermilk that might be in here, we can go ahead and just add a little water to this and brush our bread with that. And you can use your fingers to do this, or if you've got a pastry brush, you can do that. You can use that too. So now after you get this all brushed with your buttermilk or your milk, whatever you're using, if you've put some of the old-fashioned rolled oats into your soda bread, you can go ahead and sprinkle some on top if you'd like to do that, or you can sprinkle a little flour on top, or you can just leave it plain, which is what we'll do today. Now, once you get your dough all coated beautifully with the buttermilk or the milk, whatever you're using, we're going to go ahead and put this on the middle rack of our preheated oven, and we're going to bake it for 30 minutes until it's nice and golden brown, and when you put a toothpick in the middle, it comes out clean. Well, look at this glorious soda bread. I'll overlay a close-up picture so that you can see it. It just looks beautiful. And it was in my oven exactly 30 minutes to reach this lovely golden brown color. And then I tested it with my toothpick just by pushing it down in the middle and pulling it out. And it came out completely dry. And that's what you're looking for, either dry or with just some dry crumbs on it. You don't want it to have any wet dough or batter on your toothpick when you pull it out of a baked good. And what I recommend is, because everybody's oven's a little different, just take a peek at your soda bread at about 25 minutes. And if it's looking nice and golden brown like this, go ahead and test it with your toothpick. And if it comes out clean, it's ready. And if not, just let it go the full 30 minutes. Or if your oven tends to run cold, it may need a few extra minutes. But this was perfect at 30 minutes. This is still quite hot, but I just want to tap on it so you can hear the lovely crust that's been created. And I hope you can hear this. It's beautiful. Now it is quite hot, but I'm going to pick it up, and I just want to show you on the bottom, you'll want to do the same thing. Can you hear that hollow sound? That's how you know your soda bread's done. Well, soda bread is lovely to slice when it's warm and put some butter on it that'll melt beautifully. But I'm just going to go ahead and put this on the cooling rack, let it just cool a little bit, and once it's not hot, once it's warm and no longer hot, we'll give it a slice and a taste. Well, this has cooled a bit. It's still warm, but it's just looking glorious. Now, what we'll do is I've got a serrated knife, and we'll cut it right down the middle, and I'll show you how the crumb looks. Oh, hear that. Isn't that glorious? Well, this is your basic soda bread, your Irish soda bread, as we call it in the United States. But I learned from a cookbook back from the 1940s written by, and I believe her name is Maura Laverty. And I'll be sure to put a link, if you enjoy reading about food history and all of that, I'll put a link in the description below. And she says that in Ireland, it's actually called cake bread instead of Irish soda bread. And I thought that was a wonderful description, because it's almost a little cake-like, but nonetheless, it's a wonderful substitution for bread if you have no yeast or sourdough starter on hand. Well, let's go ahead and cut a slice here and give it a taste. Well, this just looks so lovely. I really am happy with the texture and the crumb, as they say. I'll take another picture and overlay that so that you can see it as well. Now I've got some nice butter here. And of course it's Irish butter. I love the Kerrygold Irish butter. I took it out a little early so that hopefully it's soft enough to spread on this, because I think we've got to put some Irish butter on our Irish soda bread. Alrighty, let's give this a taste and see how it is. It's really delicious. Excuse me. Well, I think you're going to really like this bread. It's so delicious. I even had to give it a second bite. And it's got a wonderful texture, very similar to bread, as if you had used yeast. I think you're going to be very impressed with this. Today I'm sharing a traditional Irish brown soda bread recipe. It has just a few ingredients and it's easy to make. Now this is a very basic recipe for an Irish brown soda bread. You can certainly jazz it up and add raisins or currants. You can add an egg, you can add more sugar. There are various things that people do to jazz up soda bread. But today I want to share with you just the very basic bread. Now the first thing that you're going to need to start with is 4 cups of whole wheat flour. Now if you have Irish wholemeal flour, which is a coarsely ground red wheat, that's great. But if not, don't worry. Whole wheat, just regular plain whole wheat that you can find at your grocery store will work in a pinch. And the next thing you're going to need is 1 cup of all-purpose flour. And the next you're going to need 1 teaspoon of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of salt. Now, if you don't have baking soda, you can use baking powder, but then when it comes to adding the wet ingredients, in our case buttermilk, you're going to want to use regular milk. And as I mentioned about the buttermilk, we're going to need 2 to 3 cups of buttermilk. We're going to start with 2 cups and we're going to look at the texture of it and then we'll see how much more we need to add. So this couldn't be easier. All we're going to do is just mix in all our ingredients together in a bowl like this. I'm just using a whisk. You can use a spoon, whatever you want. Just make sure you get that salt and baking soda and all-purpose flour well incorporated with the whole wheat flour. Now if you don't have buttermilk, don't worry. As I mentioned before, you can use baking powder instead of the baking soda and just use regular milk. Or if you want to use baking soda and you want the flavor of the buttermilk, you can simply take regular milk, add a little lemon juice, and let it sour on the counter. The other option is you can take some yogurt and thin it with milk to the consistency of buttermilk, and that'll work too. So I've just made a little well in the middle here, and I'm going to get ready and go ahead and pour in my first cup of buttermilk. And now my second cup of buttermilk will go in. So now all you want to do is take your hand, make it kind of like a claw, and you just want to go in, clean hands of course, and you want to go in and start to mix in all your flour into your buttermilk. And just keep your hand just like that, like a little claw, and just work the flour in to the buttermilk. Keeping your hand open like that. No need to mix it aggressively, just very gently, just with an open hand. Okay, I just want to show you, it's quite dry, so it's definitely going to need that 3rd cup of buttermilk. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in, and then I'll continue to mix it all together, and then I'll show you how we pull it together and make it into a loaf. Well, I've got the dough all mixed up and it looks perfect. It's going to be sort of a wet, straggly dough. Now I cleaned my hands, but I floured them and I floured my board, and all you're going to want to do is just take this out of the bowl and put it right onto your floured board here. And then all I'm going to do is just flip it over like that. So I've got some flour dusted on each side. And then basically we're just going to shape it into the shape that we want, just a nice round shape. Not too much kneading, just a little bit of shaping, and then that's going to be it. So basically that's it. I just keep kind of patting it around a little until I get it into a nice, let me lift this up for you so you can see, a nice shape. And we'll get ready to put it into our pan to get ready to bake it. Now I've got my oven preheated to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to bake my Irish soda bread in a cast iron pan. You can also do it on a baking sheet, either is fine. And I've just got this greased with some beef tallow. You can use lard, butter, whatever you like. And I've got the bread now. I've got it right here on my lifter, and I'm just going to put it right into there. Perfect. Let me just get that situated perfectly. And now we have to do the most important thing, and that is to make a cross across the top, because as I learned from my Irish father, you must let the fairies out, otherwise the bread won't rise. So with a sharp knife, I'm just going to make a cross right across the front, right across the top, I mean. Perfect. Now, the next thing we're going to do is get a little milk, and I'm just going to take a pastry brush and brush it all over with a little milk, and then we're going to put some salt on top and pop it in the oven. Well, I've got it brushed with the milk, and now I'm just going to sprinkle a really nice, this is a nice flaked salt, and that'll give it a nice little savory, salty flavor, which will go perfect with what it's going to be served with, the corned beef and cabbage. And into the oven it goes. Now I'm going to leave that in the oven for 30 minutes, and at that time I'll check it. If it looks nicely brown, I'll lift it up, I'll give it a little tap on the bottom. If it sounds hollow, I'll know it's done. If not, I'll give it another 5 or 10 minutes. Look at this gloriousness, traditional Irish brown soda bread. I know I should wait till it cools more, but I think we need to go in for a taste. Oh, listen to that. Today I want to share with you how to make whole wheat Irish soda bread. Now we'll go over the ingredients for this whole wheat Irish soda bread, but you don't need to write anything down. If you open the description underneath this video, there'll be a link that'll say recipe. If you click on that, it'll take you over to my website, Mary's Nest, same name as my YouTube channel, and you can read the recipe online or you can print it out. Now the first ingredient that you're going to need is flour, and you're going to need a total of about 4 to 4.5 cups of flour. And of that total, you want 3 cups to be a whole wheat flour. Now you can just use the regular whole wheat flour that you buy from the grocery store, or you can use any of the ancient whole wheat flours like einkorn or spelt. For the remaining 1.5 cups of flour, you're simply going to want to use an all-purpose flour. Now what I've got here are whole spelt berries, and as I mentioned earlier, spelt, not unlike einkorn, are ancient wheats. And I'm going to grind these into whole spelt flour. But don't worry if you don't have whole wheat berries or whole spelt berries or whole einkorn berries, whatever the case may be, and you're just starting with the whole grain flour, that's fine. But I find when it comes to whole grain flours, if you have the ability to grind them fresh, they're really wonderful. And these are also sprouted spelt berries. And if you would like to learn how to sprout your whole grain, if you have whole grain, I have a video where I show you how to do that, and I walk you through the process step by step to how to soak it, sprout it, dry it, and then grind it into flour. And it's actually very easy to sprout whole grains. Most of the work is on the part of the whole grain. So if that's something that you want to learn how to do, be sure to check in the description below where I'll put a link to the video where I show you how to do that. And I'll also link to it in the iCards. Now, sprouting whole grains isn't necessary, but if you've been with me a while, you've probably heard me talk about phytic acid, which is one of the anti-nutrients that are in whole grain. And it's not something that I worry too much about when I'm making some type of bread where I'm using a sourdough starter, because that helps deactivate some of the phytic acid. But when I'm making a quick bread, I do like to use sprouted flour as opposed to unsprouted flour. Now, that's really very much a personal choice, because phytic acid, although it does contain some anti-nutrients, that does make it a little more difficult for us to digest and a little more difficult for us to absorb certain nutrients. It also is an antioxidant, so it has both a good and a bad side. So don't worry if sprouting flour is not something that you're considering doing. If you find you digest it fine and you don't have any trouble with it, then definitely just use the whole wheat flour that you buy from the grocery store. Or if you are grinding, any einkorn or spelt or other ancient grain is fine to use. Now, a cup of whole grain yields approximately 1.5 cups of flour. So I'm going to grind enough grain to get what I need to make this bread. And if I have a little left over, no problem. I'm just going to pop it in my freezer. It'll stay fresh, and I'll keep it there for another baking project. Now, the grinder I'm using is a Mockmill 100. This is the smaller version of the Mockmill. I am so pleased with this. I purchased this myself. Now, the Mockmill has settings from 1 to 10, depending on how coarse or how fine you want your grain. I like to just grind most of my grain on number 5. I find that it's just an all-purpose grain, or an all-purpose grind, that works perfect for most of my baking. So I'm going to just start grinding this, and you'll hear it's not too loud, but we'll get started. Now I've got all my whole spelt berries ground into flour, and what I'm going to do is take about 1 cup of this, and I'm going to start sifting it. And the reason that I'm doing that is, as I said in the beginning of the recipe, you're going to need 3 cups of whole grain flour, but you're going to also need 1½ cups of all-purpose flour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sift out, I'm going to take 1 cup and I'm going to sift out as much bran and germ from that 1 cup as I can to try to make a spelt all-purpose flour. And you can use a little mesh strainer like this, or if you want to get it even finer, you can use an actual baker's sift. And these are very common. I'll put a link in the description below. They're very common and very reasonable. And these have a tighter mesh than just a regular strainer. And you can sift out even more bran and germ. But I'll do my best with this because I think most people have a strainer. And never feel bad about sifting out a little bit of the bran and germ or adding in a little bit of all-purpose flour or bread flour whenever you're baking something. And the reason is this was a very common practice done by our ancestors because they knew if they sifted out a little bit of the bran and the germ, it would make a lighter bread and one that was a little easier to digest and more pleasant to the palate. But you've still got plenty of nutrition in your 3 cups of whole grain flour, so you really don't need to worry. So this is some of the bran and the germ that I'm sifting out of my 1 cup of whole grain flour, and I'm just going to keep going ahead and sifting that to get out as much as I can. Now, when I've shown you how to do this in the past, some of you have asked me, well, what should you do with the bran or the germ? You don't want to throw it out. And I don't blame you. There's no need to throw it out. You can put it in your freezer and save it, and then you can use it as an ingredient to add in when you make bran muffins or a homemade bran cereal. Now, the first thing you want to do before we start mixing up our dough is to preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And I believe that's about 218 degrees Celsius. And the next thing you're going to want to do is get a baking sheet, and I've just put down a piece of parchment paper here. You could put aluminum foil, or you could just give it a little greasing and a little dusting with flour. Now, other options, if you don't have a baking sheet, are to use a cake pan or a cast iron frying pan, anything that you can put your dough in and then put it into the oven to bake. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is add our 3 cups of whole grain flour. In my case, I've got the whole grain spelt flour here, and we're going to go ahead and add that to our mixing bowl. You want a nice large mixing bowl. And next you want to go ahead and add in your 1½ cups of all-purpose flour or bread flour, or in my case, the sifted flour. And I went ahead and sifted more flour, so I would have the 1½ cups. Alrighty, then you just want to go and whisk these together to get them nicely incorporated. And then we're going to add 3 ingredients. We've got salt, 1 teaspoon. We've got baking soda, 1 teaspoon. And then what I've got here is a whole sweetener. It's called sucanat, and that's 1 tablespoon. Now, depending on where you are on transitioning from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, you may just have white sugar in your kitchen, and that's fine. You can definitely use that. But if you are using whole sweeteners, you can definitely use sucanat. It just stands for sugarcane natural, and it's simply the dried sugarcane juice. You could also use maple sugar. You could use date sugar, coconut sugar. Any of those would work. And I know that whenever I use sugar or some form of sweetener, many of you ask me, can it be left out? And yes, this is sort of a little special edition, adding in a little bit of sugar. I'm not really sure that it's traditional to the original whole wheat Irish soda breads, or brown Irish soda bread as they're known. So if you want to leave this out, you certainly can. So let's go ahead and get our salt in here. And we got our baking soda. That's the leavening agent for an Irish soda bread. And then we'll put in our little bit of sweetener. And then I'm just going to give this a good mix around to get everything incorporated. We want to make sure that baking soda and the salt are really well mixed with the flour. Now let's talk about some of the other ingredients for a minute. Traditionally, an Irish soda bread, whether made with an all-purpose flour or a whole grain flour, generally didn't have a lot of additions. It usually was the baking soda, the salt, the flour, and then some sort of soured milk, whether it was milk that had actually soured or buttermilk. And that's basically all that was used to make this quick bread. It was a very simple, very country cooking type bread. Now, soda breads over time have been somewhat added to and modified to make them even a little more tasty and delicious. And sometimes people will add some butter, and then that's all. Other times people will add an egg, and that's all. And then sometimes people will add butter and an egg. So today I'm going to try to make this as delicious as possible, and we'll use butter and an egg. Now what you're going to want is 4 tablespoons of butter. And of course I'm using an Irish butter. I'm using Kerrygold butter. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this into our flour. And this is, it's kind of room temperature. Not super soft yet, but it's getting there. And what we're going to do is, as I said, put this in our flour, and we're going to mix the butter in until we get a very crumbly sand-like mixture. Now you'll know when you have all the flour and butter mixed in thoroughly together, because you'll be able to take a clump, squeeze it in your hand, it'll kind of stay together like damp sand, and then it'll easily fall apart once you just give it a little crush. Now, if you want to add any dried fruit to this Irish soda bread, this is the time to do it. And I'm going to add in currants, which is somewhat traditional. You can also use raisins as well, but I like currants because they're a little smaller, and it's also what I have. So I'm going to sprinkle those in, and the reason you want to put those in now and get them well dusted in the flour is because if they have flour on them, they will be disseminated more evenly through your Irish soda bread, as opposed to just all sinking to the bottom. Now I mentioned earlier that traditionally some sort of sour milk was used, and what I've got here is buttermilk. But don't worry if you don't have buttermilk. If you have regular milk, any type of regular milk will do. Whole milk, part skim, all skim, or fat-free, whatever they call it today. But whatever the case may be, you can add a little lemon juice or a little vinegar, about a tablespoon, to this 1 3/4, and mix it around a little, let it sit for a bit, and it'll curdle and turn it into a sour milk or a substitute buttermilk. And it's this sour milk or buttermilk that really helps make the Irish soda bread very tender. Buttermilk and sour milk in general make any baked good very tender. It makes cakes tender and quick breads tender. But if you don't have it, don't worry. Say you've got milk but you have no way to sour it, you can go ahead and use milk. And depending on what type of milk you use, if you use a whole milk, it's going to make for a richer soda bread. If you use a fat-free milk, it's going to make for a less rich soda bread. And for those of you who like to keep things dairy-free, you can use one of the alternate milks, but it does change the taste and the texture slightly, so you just want to be aware of that. And yes, in a pinch, you can also use water. But water is going to make a very basic, very simple soda bread. Now I'm just going to go ahead and crack my egg in here. I just want to make sure that it's a good fresh egg. Yes, it looks good. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my egg to my buttermilk, and I'm going to give it a little whisk around before we add it to our dry ingredients. Now all you want to do is make a little well in the middle of all your dry ingredients, and we're going to go ahead and add in our wet, our 1 3/4 cups of buttermilk mixed with our egg. Next, once you get your wet ingredients poured in with your dry, you want to take your hand, clean hand, and you just want to start, have it kind of an open claw kind of shape, and you just want to start incorporating the dry ingredients into the wet until you get a nice dough. Now once you get all of the dry ingredients incorporated with the wet, it may be a little sticky, which you're seeing with mine is a little sticky. So all I'm going to do is take a little flour and put it on my hand, not too much, just a little bit here. Just going to incorporate a little more flour just to get this dry and ready to put on our baking sheet. And you don't want to knead this. You really don't want to overwork this. You just want to get it dry enough to be handled. Well, I've got it into the shape of a ball. It's not very sticky anymore. We've more or less cleaned the bowl, and we're ready to transfer to our baking sheet. Now I'm just going to flour my hands a little and just flatten this down ever so gently. Now the next thing that you want to do is make a nice cross on top of your Irish soda bread. And I've got a serrated knife here, that works very well, but any sharp knife will do. And as my Irish father learned from his Irish mother, my grandmother Mary, you've got to take the tip of a sharp knife and then you've got to poke 4 holes in each quadrant of your Irish soda bread. And that lets out the fairies, and that'll guarantee that this will be delicious. Now we're going to go ahead and pop this into our preheated oven. It's going to take about 35 to 45 minutes to bake thoroughly. You'll know that it's done because it'll be a beautiful golden brown, and if you pick it up and tap on the bottom, it'll sound well baked and hollow. Well, look at this glorious whole wheat Irish soda bread. It just came beautiful. Now, I checked it at 35 minutes, but it wasn't quite fully baked, so I let it go for the whole 45 minutes. But everybody's oven's different, so check yours at 35 minutes and see how it's doing. Now, if you're worried that it's getting too brown on top, but it's still not quite baked and you've got to go for those full 45 minutes, don't worry, you can just tent it with a little aluminum foil, let it cook, and it won't brown anymore on top. Now what I'm going to do is transfer this Irish soda bread to my cooling rack and let it just cool for a few minutes. You want to just give it a few minutes before you slice it. You can definitely serve it warm, but give it about 10 minutes to cool. You can definitely serve it at room temperature. That's fine too. And if you want to maybe serve it the next day and it's been refrigerated, just slice it and you can warm it in the oven, or you can stick it in your toaster and then some nice hot butter on top and it'll be scrumptious. So let's have this cool a bit, and then we'll slice it, we'll look at it inside, and we'll give it a taste. Well, this has cooled about 10 minutes, so we're all ready to slice it. And if you've ever wondered why you put a cross on the top of Irish soda bread, is because the reasons are actually twofold. One is that the cross harkens back to the significance of the Catholic faith to the Irish people. And secondly, it allows for the bread to cook thoroughly in the middle, which was very important, especially when this may have just been being cooked in a fireplace over peat in a little Irish cottage. And this way they knew that it would cook thoroughly. Now I'm just going to use my serrated knife again, but any knife that you have should work well. Oh, so listen to that. It sounds good. Well, this looks lovely. Oh, and the aroma just smells delicious. Let's slice a piece off here and we'll put some butter on it and give it a taste. I've got a good slathering of Irish butter here. Mmm. Mmm. Oh, that's delicious. And I love it with the currants. They add a wonderful level of sweetness. Well, hopefully I made St. Patrick proud. Well, now that you've got 3 Irish soda breads to choose from, you can round out your corned beef and cabbage meal perfectly. But we can't forget about dessert. My sweet mother Gloria was of Northern Italian heritage and my father was of Irish heritage. But my father grew up eating what is commonly referred to as Irish apple cake. He didn't know how to cook, he didn't know the recipe, nothing like that. But when he and my mother got married, my mother said, "Oh, I want to be able to make that Irish apple cake for him." But again, like I said, he had no recipe, and I'll share more about this when we start baking it. But the bottom line is she kind of cobbled together, this is so long ago, no internet, nothing like that. She kind of cobbled together what she thought would be a good Irish apple cake. And it became our Italian Irish apple cake. And there's nothing like it. It's very, very unique, and I think that you're going to really enjoy making it. So let's head over to the kitchen island with that video, and we'll start making our Irish-Italian, Italian-Irish apple cake. Today I'm sharing a traditional Irish apple cake recipe that was actually taught to me by my Italian mother. More on that in a minute. As I've shared with you in the past, my mother is Italian, but she married an Irishman, my father. And so she always tried to make things special for St. Patrick's Day. And my father often talked about this Irish apple cake that he loved. but he didn't know what went into it other than apples. My mother didn't have a recipe for it, and so she decided to just experiment and create an apple cake of her own. And so it became our family's traditional Irish apple cake. Now this cake couldn't be simpler to make because you do it all in one bowl. And the first thing that you're going to need is 2½ cups of flour. Now when my mother first started making this cake, she would just use all-purpose flour. But as time went on, whole wheat flour became more common, and she was very conscious about health, so she would start making it with whole wheat flour. So today, that's what I'm going to use, and I'm actually using whole wheat pastry flour, but you can certainly use whole wheat flour as well. And to that, you're going to want to add 1½ cups of sugar, and this is just plain white cane sugar, it's organic. And then I've got 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So what I'm going to do is just take my whisk just to mix this all up and make sure that I get the baking soda and the salt and the sugar and the flour all incorporated together. And now to this, I'm going to add 3 eggs. 1, 2, and now we'll put in our 3rd egg. 3. And now we're going to add 1.5 sticks of butter. And this is just softened butter. And I'm actually using Irish butter. And now we're going to add in 1.5 cups of buttermilk. And that's it. Now all we're going to do is take our mixer and we're going to start on a low speed for about 30 seconds just to incorporate, and then we'll go up to a high speed for 3 minutes. So here we go. I'll just start this on a low speed and then I'll work up to 3 minutes on a high speed. And that's 3 minutes. So now we're all set and ready to add in our apples. Now what I've got here are 4 Granny Smith apples, which I've just diced up, and I'm going to get ready to toss them with a little flour before, just plain all-purpose flour, before I incorporate them into the batter. And now you can use any apple you want. My mom always baked with Granny Smith apples. She liked the sort of tart, crunchy taste in comparison to the sweetness of a cake or a pie or whatever the case may be. But you can certainly substitute any kind of apple you want. I would just recommend that you pick one that has a little bit of a crunch to it rather than a soft apple, because you want the apple to maintain its texture in the cake. So I've got the apples tossed with the flour, and now I'm just going to fold them right into the batter. And then we'll get ready to put this right into our cake pan. Now I just wanted to show you, I'm using a tube pan, and the reason is my mother always used a tube pan, and this is her tube pan. Whenever she baked a cake with fruit in it, she would always use a tube pan because she found that baking with fruit can sometimes cause a cake to be a little dense or sink a little bit in the middle. And she found that this was her solution to preventing that. And I also think that it's a good pan for a beginner to use if you're worried about your cake sinking a little in the middle. This avoids that problem. But if you don't have a tube pan, don't worry about it. You can certainly use a springform pan to make this cake. So now I'm just going to go ahead and pour the batter as carefully as possible into my pan. Well, I've got my batter in the pan, and now I'm just going around and sprinkling the top with a little demerara sugar. You can use anything that you want. You can use white sugar, turbinado sugar, anything will be fine. It's just to give the top a little bit of extra sweetness and a little bit of crunch. Well, I've got the sugar topping on, and now I'm going to put it in my oven, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 50 minutes. Well, I just took the cake out of the oven and it looks glorious. I'm just going to give it a minute to cool before I take it out, but I just want you to hear the crunchy topping that's formed by putting the sugar on it. Can you hear that? Oh, it's going to be delicious to bite into. I can't wait. Well, I removed it from the pan. Now I'm just going to let it cool a little more, and then I'll tip it over to remove the tube and plate it and cut it up. Well, now that's an apple cake, a traditional Irish apple cake fit for St. Patrick. Let's cut into this. Listen to this. Oh, I love that sugar topping. Oh, listen to that. Oh, my goodness. Oh, geez, it cuts like butter. Delicious. So now you've really rounded out your meal. You've got your corned beef and cabbage with your corned beef sliced beautifully. You've got some Irish soda bread, and you've got that wonderful apple cake, or Irish Italian apple cake for dessert. But I want to share one special recipe with you and that is for something that's called St. Patrick's bacon. It's very easy to make, and you most likely have the ingredients on hand. And what's so beautiful about this recipe, it is in essence a casserole, and it's very traditional to Ireland. And so it can be fun to make to introduce your family, your friends, dinner guests, whomever you're entertaining on St. Patrick's Day with something that's quintessentially Irish. But best of all, this can be eaten any time of day. It's perfect for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or just a snack. So let's head over to the kitchen island in that video and make St. Patrick's bacon. Today I want to share with you how to make St. Patrick's bacon casserole, perfect for your St. Patrick's Day celebration. So who was St. Patrick, or Patrick as some of you may know him as? Well, he was a man who was born somewhere around the year 390 AD. St. Patrick lived in Britain, but he was kidnapped by pirates and brought to Ireland. While in Ireland, Patrick was made to work as a shepherd, but he prayed every day that he would one day be able to return home. And eventually he got the opportunity. He convinced some sailors to bring him back to Britain, but while he was there, he decided that he would study to become a priest, and eventually, as a priest, returned to Ireland. And today he is venerated as St. Patrick, and we celebrate his feast day on March 17th. And as they say, no matter where you're from, on St. Patrick's Day, everybody's a little Irish. Now in the past, I've shared with you a whole host of recipes for St. Patrick's Day, and I'll be sure to link to the playlist in the description underneath this video, where I've got how to make corned beef and cabbage on the stovetop and in the Instant Pot. I've got a couple of Irish soda breads for you, as well as a lovely Irish apple cake. But today I thought it would be fun to make something different. I have this book, and it's very cutely titled, Cooking with the Saints. And when I was looking through it, I found a number of recipes for St. Patrick's Day. And the one that really pulled me in was St. Patrick's bacon. I think everything tastes great with bacon, so I think this casserole is going to be delicious. First, let's go over the ingredients that we're going to need to make this St. Patrick's bacon casserole. You're going to want 3 average-sized potatoes. The recipe that I'm following lists everything in pounds or ounces, but basically it says that you're going to need 1.25 pounds of potatoes. And I think about 3 medium size, this one's a little on the smaller side, is about 1.25 pounds. And you're going to want a starchy potato, like a Yukon Gold, which is what I have here, or a russet. Your more waxy potatoes, like your Redskin potatoes, don't work as well in this particular casserole. Next, you're going to need 1 cup of milk, 1 egg, and 2 tablespoons of butter. Plus, you're going to need a little extra butter to butter the baking dish, which we'll talk about in a minute. Plus, you're going to need some salt and pepper. I've just got some fine ground sea salt, and I'm going to grind the black pepper fresh. Next, you're going to need 1 medium-sized onion. You're going to want to peel it, and then you're going to want to slice it thinly. And remember, don't throw out your onion skins. Add these to your scrap bag for when you make a bone broth or another type of vegetable broth. These are very rich in nutrition, and you don't want to throw them out. Then the star of the show, the bacon. And this recipe calls for what's referred to as back bacon. Here in the United States, that would be very similar to Canadian bacon, which I believe in Canada they simply call back bacon. So you'll have to let me know about that, my friends to the north. Now, although in the United States, the Canadian bacon is usually completely round and very lean, I was very happy to find this bacon. It was labeled a Canadian bacon, but it looked more like the picture in the cookbook. And it's a little more oval, and it's got a little bit of the fat in place. And so I thought that that was a good option because, as I said, it resembled the bacon used in the actual recipe. But use whatever you have on hand. Now, here in the United States, when we often think of bacon, we think of the long strips. They're not using that in this recipe, but to a certain extent, I think it might work if that's all that you have available to you. Now, for making this St. Patrick's bacon casserole, the first thing that we need to do is peel our potatoes. Now, just like with your onion skins, I don't want you to throw out your potato peels. You have a couple of options as to what you can do with these. You can lay these out on a parchment-lined baking sheet and dry them in your oven on its lowest setting. Once these are dry, you can grind them up like in a little spice grinder and reserve that powder to then add to room temperature water that you use to feed your sourdough starter. And you don't need to put a lot in, maybe like a teaspoon in whatever amount of water you're using to feed your sourdough starter. And the reason is your sourdough starter is going to love all of the starch that these potatoes have, and it'll give it a nice boost. It's especially helpful if you're ever struggling with your sourdough starter to get it nice and bubbly. Alternatively, you can take these potato peels, put them in a saucepan, cover them with water, bring it up to a boil, and then turn it down to its lowest simmer on your stovetop, put the lid on, and let them simmer on low for about 20 or 30 minutes. Once you've let them simmer, just remove the potato peels, and the water that you have can be reserved once it reaches room temperature to replace any other type of water you would use to feed your sourdough starter. So both of these waters, whether you add a little bit of the powdered potato peels or you simply use water in which you've simmered the potato peels, are what I think of as fortified waters, and they often help give a nice boost to your sourdough starter. Now all we want to do is slice our potatoes very thinly. Just do the best job that you can. That's the nice thing about home cooking. It's not an exact science. You just want to get it thinly sliced. Now that we've got our potatoes sliced, we need to go ahead and assemble our casserole. Now, the recipe does not indicate what size casserole dish you need, but what I've got here is an 8.5 by an 8.5, 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches. And the reason I picked this size was because the recipe says that it serves 4. So I think that this will work. But if you have a rectangle-shaped casserole dish or an oval casserole dish, I think those would work as well. But what you need to remember to do is to make sure that it's well greased, and I've got this well greased with butter. Now what we're going to do is layer the potatoes and the onions together. And as we do that, we're going to sprinkle each layer with salt and pepper. Now we're going to start with potatoes and we want to end with potatoes. Now don't worry if they don't fit exactly. It's okay if they overlap a little. Just do the best that you can. In many ways, if you've ever made scalloped potatoes or au gratin potatoes, in many ways this is very similar. The only difference is we're also layering in onions. Then once you get your layer of potatoes in your baking dish, you want to take your thinly sliced onions and put a layer of them on top of your potatoes. Next, I'm going to take just a little bit of salt. The recipe doesn't indicate exactly how much salt you're going to need overall, but basically what I'm doing is putting a pinch of a sprinkle over the potato and onions, and then I'm just going to come in here with some freshly ground black pepper. Now that I've got my salt and pepper in here, I'm going to go in with my second layer of potatoes and then my second layer of onions and then more salt and pepper. Well, I've got all my layers in and I've sprinkled my potatoes with salt. Now I'm just going to give another twist here of some black pepper. Next, what we need to do is take our milk and put the egg into there. And I think that's sort of like we're making a little custard. And I'm just going to go ahead and pour this egg right down, plop, into my milk. I like to break it in a little bowl all on its own, just in case it's not looking too good. But this egg looked beautiful. Now, I'm just going to whip this egg in with this milk. And if you've been with me a while, you know how much I love my magic whisk. Years ago, this thing is just so wonderful. Years ago, I was watching a cooking show with Nigella Lawson, and she was using this magic whisk, and she was raving about how much she loved it. And I said, oh, I've got to try it. And I found one, and they're just a couple of dollars. You probably will find them if you have like a local kitchen store in your area, or maybe in the kitchen aisle at your grocery store. And if not, I'll put a link in the description underneath this video, but try to find it locally if you can. But what is so terrific about this, look at how beautifully and easily it incorporated that egg into the milk. Now we're just going to take our egg and milk mixture, and we're going to pour this right over our potato and onion mixture. Next, we're going to take our 2 tablespoons of butter, and we're just going to dot the top of our casserole. Now all that's left to do after we've dotted our casserole with the butter is to take our bacon and just sit it on top of the potato mixture. Now that we've got our bacon on top of our casserole, the recipe says to cover the baking dish, and then we're going to go ahead and put this into a 350-degree Fahrenheit preheated oven. And we're going to bake this covered for 1 hour at that 350-degree Fahrenheit temperature. Well, after 1 hour, I remove the aluminum foil and let the casserole continue to cook for another 15 minutes, and it looks glorious. I'm anxious to give this a taste. Now, this is supposed to be for 4 people, and I think that's why you use just 4 pieces of bacon. In this case, the back bacon or the Canadian bacon. But let me scoop this out. Let me get my plate here. All righty. Oh, this looks wonderful. Oh, I think if you like scalloped potatoes or rotten potatoes, things along those lines, I think this is going to be wonderful. Let me move this a little. It's very hot. Well, I'm going to slice this so that I can get a little bit of everything. I want to get the potatoes and the onions. I'll bring you in close so you can see everything on this fork. Oh, this looks wonderful. I love the way the custard, has that egg in it. This looks great. Oh, that is delicious. You're going to really enjoy this. If you've enjoyed making all these recipes, and especially the Irish soda breads, and maybe you'd like to do more easy baking, be sure to click on this video over here where I have a whole playlist for you of some of my favorite baked goods. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.